Today, we're going to learn about the dangers of radium through the eyes of the Radium Girls. Radium was discovered in 1888. Radium was then mixed with zinc sulfide to make luminescent paint. In 1918, the paint came to the U.S. under the United States Radium Corporation, labeled as Undark. Other companies marketed it as Luna and Marklights. It was at this point that radium became used often in factories, specifically to paint watch faces, altimeters for planes, and various other applications. The girls working at the factories were encouraged to use their mouths to sharpen the tips of the brushes. Part of the reason for this was to save money, as the paint and materials were expensive and dipping the brushes in water would lose a good amount of material. It is now known with every swipe of the brush on their tongues, they were ingesting radioactive material. There are various stories in which the girls would paint their fingernails, hair, skin, and even their teeth, as they were assured the radium paint was harmless. Of course, at the time, radium was starting to be considered a cure-all from anything from cancer to tuberculosis and even hair loss. Companies worldwide either sold or marketed the fact that their product contained radium, even if it didn't. Luckily for consumers, many of them didn't, as the cost of 1 gram of radium at the time in today's dollars would be around $1.9 million. Slowly, all the girls who used to paint at the factories started to have major health complications. They would feel the chronic fatigue. Their teeth would slowly decay and start to rot. And even after the removal of those teeth, the gums wouldn't heal. In some cases, their jaws would fall apart at the dentist's touch. Their skin would be so frail that even touching it would cause open wounds. Some who were pregnant would have stillborn babies. Attorneys for U.S. Radium argued the variety of symptoms made it impossible to prove what the underlying cause was. Most of these girls were in their early to mid-20s, and there's no way to tell just how many of these dial painters there were. The girls started to become known as Radium Girls, or the Society of the Living Dead. They were shunned in their communities, as at the time, jobs were few and far in between, and these jobs paid quite well. People were worried the jobs would go away if the girls went too far. The first lawsuit was filed against U.S. Radium in 1927, as it was very hard to find an attorney who would take their case. U.S. Radium's attorneys then said they were past the 2-year limitations for complaints. The girls in the lawsuit later settled out of court. There were other lawsuits that came from this, and eventually U.S. Radium, along with others, had to shut down. Not to be deterred, the owner of U.S. Radium later opened another factory down the road and called it Luminous Systems. He even had some of the same crew from the last facility painting again. Finally, in 1976, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission fined Luminous Systems for exposing its workers to 1,666 times the allowable limit of exposure to radiation. After many years and many unpaid lawsuits, Luminous was forced to shut down. In the 1980s, almost 60 years later, a man went to Ottawa, Illinois, also known as Death City. The reason it was referred to as Death City was due to the variety of radium girls buried there. This man carried a radiation instrument with him that went crazy when he walked by their graves. The bones were still radioactive. These brave girls paved the way for all sorts of regulations regarding natural and unnatural radioactive material.